Welcome to episode 28 of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we'll be discussing a 2018 film, Shoplifters, directed by Koreda. I think that's the right pronunciation. I actually practiced it because we've messed up many times on this
of course.
So this film came out in 2018, I believe. And just to give a quick synopsis before I ask you some just general questions,
Sure.
It's basically the plot line. It follows a group of I want to say random non-blood related. That's maybe the keyword, non-blood related characters who basically form an adjunct family in a sense. And we're taking through it, like I guess maybe a little window through their lives and how they survive scraping on money and shoplifting, hence the movie title. And it follows like a group of characters. I believe two children, Lynn and what's the other, Shota, the other boy, and then two adults and one teenager. I think the teenager name is Aki.
Mm-hmm.
And then the adults are.
Wait, are you talking about? I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think
Okay.
you're talking about the other kid. It's not Lynn. It's Yuri.
Yeah, Yuri is the other. She's the teenager, right?
No, Yuri's the child.
Yuri's the child. Sorry, excuse the names. We're not that
Yeah.
versed in like Japanese names. I think okay. So let me go take a step back. So I think the two adults are
Osuma and Nobuyo.
Osamu and Nobuya,
Osamu,
and then there's Aki. Aki's
a teenager.
She's the teenager. Shota's the boy.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. Yuri's the girl, right? And then the old lady, what's her name?
Hatsu.
Hatsu. Okay.
Hatsu. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're not Japanese. We're trying our best.
It's Hatsu, I believe. So these people and it's explained a little bit how they all formed as a family. But yeah, it's basically seeing the world through their eyes as someone who's at the bottom of Japanese society. Yeah. So I in general, that was the one concept I found very fascinating because it's not something that's usually, especially a country like Japan, it's not usually something that's covered often, at least from what
Definitely
I know.
Not.
So I'm curious about what were your watching this film? What did you find was unique? Big takeaways you got from it? How was your viewing experience, basically?
So I thought this was interesting, and I guess a point I wanted to bring up. It's not evident at the beginning that they're not all related. That's sort of revealed over time throughout the film that you're like, oh, none of these characters are actually really related. You kind of figure it out as events sort of pass by and then realize, oh, these are just people that are not blood related, but have come together by circumstance and really rely upon each other, right? But that also means that they have some loyalty, but they don't as well because they're also not blood related, right? Because they're sort of creatures of survival in this film. So I think this was a very interesting film to me because, from a Western perspective, especially in America, you don't really know. We sort of have this outside perception of what Japan and South Korean society sort of looks like because they're very Western Asian countries. They're both democracies. They both, at least from our point of view, have like pretty high standards of living based on the world scale. But it's really interesting when you sort of delve into a lot more than of the different social classes within it. A movie in South Korea that was very good at sort of looking at that was Parasite, which won an Oscar last year, as well as probably our favorite film since we've done this podcast so far, which is Burning. Really took a look at social class. And then from Japanese society, obviously this film. I thought it was really good because it sort of this film is just interesting because you're sort of just walking through life's events of these characters, and really their sort of routine has really been cemented in terms of like what they do. Osamu, is that how you pronounce his name?
I believe it's Osamu,
yeah.
Yeah,
Osamu and is a day laborer, and him and Shota, which is the boy they sort of come to adopt in a way. They all live together. They quite frequently go and shoplift, right? And part of it is based on survival because they're not super affluent. But it's also, you feel, at least personally, I felt very bad because I mean, I don't live in a situation like that where you have like 8 people in a very crowded space, or like it would seem like 8 people. I can't. So
I
it's like
believe
six
it's
or seven.
all the characters live in that. I was
Yeah,
gonna
they
ask
all
about
live in
like I thought one of the interesting earlier moments in the film is like even as they bring the girl into the live with them,
it.
and that's how you're introduced to the apartment actually through Yuri.
Yeah,
I was gonna say my personal take like how the apartment looked. I
it's
think it was
claustrophobic to me.
I'm gonna say apartment, but it could have been like a shack or a
Hmm.
home, right? But it reminded me of like actually stories that I used to read about like where we live, where we grew up, where people to make it to ends meet, right? The rents have gone up so much, right? So what they do is they take one bedroom and they pretty much
And
divide
like
it
two
like
families too.
yeah, like 3 ways, right? So
Yeah,
like you have basically all the kids living like they're basically sleeping in sleeping bags next to each other.
yeah.
It reminded me of that feel because it's like you said, very claustrophobic. I thought that was powerful in itself. How like it showed a realism of like when you're at like poor and you have to maximize your living space because you don't want to be outside.
True.
You are living in like like shelter, right? He's living in basically a closet, right? If you think about, if
Hmm.
you remember that scene, and the others are living basically like on the ground, close to each other, right? There's an absence of privacy, which I think comes up in the movie throughout,
There's no privacy.
uh, because especially when there's like those intimate moments, which we'll get to later, I think. But there's no privacy, right? Like they're always aware that there's always the potential of somebody being around because
Yeah.
it's like living in one room with 4 other people. It can get really suffocating. And actually, in this time of COVID, something that clicked in my brain when I was rethinking about this, like refreshing my memory about this movie, is everybody's told to stay at home, right?
Hmm.
And maybe if you're in an apartment or you have only one roommate, it's doable. But if you're living in this kind of situation, could you imagine being under quarantine? I mean,
Oh,
you're
it's
probably
terrible.
going,
I mean, you
you're
see
going
under.
insane, man.
I mean,
Go ahead.
even today under today's quarantine, part of it is financial, but part of it I think is people are not used to like being around each other so much that divorce rates have gone up quite a bit as well, and I think that's sort of universal, not just here in the U.S. So I can only imagine how brutal that'll be. But yeah, no, like at least where we grew up was very expensive to live in, and yeah, we know people. In fact, we know one person who has two sons, and they're teenagers, but they all have just one room that they share. That's just brutal because it's just the reality of not being able to really afford more space, and so you're left to these circumstances.
Yeah, and so I found like what was really, well, I'll give this film a lot of like a little bit like a not credit, but like a good plus up. I'm gonna say plus up here is that like often even in movies that depicted because we've seen Burning kind of interesting when he visited his dad's place. It was all like run down,
Hmm.
but he was like the only one living there. Like it was messy, but he had room because he
Oh, he
was
had space.
yeah, living there. Even when we saw Parasite, that was closest, right? They felt crammed, but we spent like as much time with their home as the rich
Yeah.
family's home, right?
So what I will say is the difference there is when you're out of the city, you tend to, even if you're poor, you tend to have more space.
Yeah, and so I think what I liked about this film was that the setting in many ways they did go outside, but the one of the top 3 places there were like films scenes were filmed was in that
The
I'm
room.
gonna say it their living space,
Hmm.
that room. So you really felt connected to that's how they lived, that's how they ate because we get scenes where they eat dinner. They stolen stuff like some extra food. I was gonna ask about that. So Shota gets told by the man. Oh, there's a lot to talk about in this movie, but
Yeah.
he gets told by Osamu like the reason why it's okay to shoplift. I'm curious about what you thought about that, right? I think he basically says like it's okay to shoplift as long as like that business doesn't like
It doesn't go under.
yeah, it doesn't go under or like it doesn't go bust, and it's not really it's a marginal loss versus like they go under. But we see that later. Shota starts having these doubts. But which initially when you saw that like excuse of shoplifting, um, you know, what was your first like visceral reaction, or did you have any at all?
I'm not sure if I necessarily had a visceral reaction. I'm not one to necessarily promote shoplifting, right? Um, it's not something I engage in. It's not part of my moral code, but you can see at least in that how sort of circumstances drive people to shoplift, right? Because it's for them a lot of it is just a point of survival, right? You can't afford, you need to eat, and really the big part of this story is showing how this group of people engages and lives just to try to survive in a society. That was pretty much what my takeaway from it.
Yeah, and in this film, I think we're gonna do a lot of jumping around just because I think it's not that linear. It's a linear story, but I think there's a lot it just connects. Like I find that later. Remember when the police officer tells him, you know, what are you teaching this boy? You know, like he has, has all these like, weird habits, and he was caught shoplifting, right? Like we'll get to that part where he hurt, but and Osamu like basically says, I taught him what I know. So I think again, there's no sequel or prequel, but like you get the sense that like everything he is doing is because he was probably taught by somebody else, and it's like we go back to, I think we've discussed this before, like you get trapped in these cycles, and Shota could have easily. So when I saw that scene, I thought what was powerful is that you could have easily seen a path. Looks like Shota at the ending might not go down that path now, but if let's say they were able to keep it going, he could have potentially gone the same path as, I'm gonna just call him adoptive father. Where he would have just done his lifestyle, right? Like he was scraping by and like just figuring out like day to day how to survive. Yeah.
Right.
And I felt bad for like each of the, at the end when they all got arrested, because you see that like society is demonizing them, right? Basically saying that they're trash and, they're not hillbillies, but like, because it's a different country, but like they're basically lower level, class members. And you do feel that like, they're not perfect, but in their circumstances, they were just trying to survive and not like, die in the street. And obviously the one character I think most viewers will feel sympathy for is the little girl, Yuri.
Sure.
Because she ends up with them only because she's just left on this outside, They don't even like, it's basically child abuse. I mean, that's what I'll say.
Oh yeah. It was brutal because you just hear that. At first they don't want, they don't, because they can barely take care of themselves in a way, right? They're having a tough time. I guess what I'm saying is just surviving and living on their own, that they're like, oh, bringing in or taking on this child is just, it's one more mouth to feed. It's one more person to take care of and consider, and one more person in their small space. But then Nobuyo, when her and her husband are taking the daughter back, Yuri, they hear the fighting and the abuse, and how that really, you could tell that unfortunately Yuri was not a wanted pregnancy, not a wanted child, based on the interactions of her parents that you hear the main characters over here. And that it's tough, and you see a little bit of humanity because they realize, we can't just drop her off. And so they decide essentially to adopt her at that point and take her in as part of their family.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I'm glad you brought that up because that's in the beginning, but later in the movie, what's interesting is that, remember when they're the police, I think it's either reporters or police, are questioning the parents. Oh, it's on a news story. They're asking like, why didn't the parents? They waited weeks to report their kids.
Oh yeah, like a month had gone by or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's another piece of evidence where those parents didn't want their kid. And they were happy they never see the kid. And then obviously when the kid was returned, they made the good faces for the media. But when we'll get to that ending, that was kind of brutal. But but you see that like you're right, like they were resource strapped, and they decided to take her in, and feed her, because she's a child, right? She's not gonna be able to contribute yet. Like Shota like contributes by shoplifting, right? Oh, that first shoplifting scene was well done, I thought. Like, it seemed very kind of like...
I know what you're talking about, with the cues and the hand signals.
Yeah, and then, like, him with a backpack and just looking at something else, and then, like, Osama, like, blocks the view. And he just, puts it in quickly and then leaves. And then, like, there's like, a few... I think there's, like, 3 scenes where, like, they really focus on the shoplifting aspect, like, the skill to do that, because it's not, like... What I will say is that in the world of cameras,
no, like, I would say the skill to do it well.
Yeah, it's probably tricky, but yeah, now it's probably like to do it well is probably like it is a skill, because like there's cameras, there's people watching all the time now. So talking about, you brought up Nobuyo. Nobuyo is her name. I'm trying to get these right. So she has an early scene too, where remember she's working in the restaurant or laundry service. I think it's laundry service.
Yeah.
And they have to let one person go.
That's later on.
Oh, that's but I want to connect it to like, because I like her character has certain scenes too. Like she has the intimate scene, she has this scene, she has the bonding with Yuri. But I'm curious about just thinking of like the social context. When she's asked to leave because I think it's actually in the middle of the movie a little bit.
Yeah, it's in the middle.
Yeah, so when she has to leave her job, what did you think of that debate and how that thought process went down? Because I thought that was
Well,
like
so apparently
I thought both sides had a case, but
they're at the lower skill level, right? But so it was interesting weeks. They didn't want to let any of the very low skill people go because they were just too cheap. Essentially, they were affordable, so that wasn't really going to make a difference. But because they were like the lead, I would say the lead positions of like those two, because they were a little bit higher skilled, then they had to pay them more. So that's why they said that they could only keep one of them. Then the two essentially ladies sort of, and the boss is kind of a jerk for doing it, but he's like, nah, he's like, I'm gonna let you two figure it out, right? And so they're talking, and Naboyu's coworker basically says, you know, you're gonna let me keep this job, and she's like, why would I do that? I need this just as much as you. She's like, yeah, but I saw you with Yuri the other day. She's like, I know what's going on. It's basically blackmail and being like, I'm gonna take you to the cops if you don't drop this
yeah.
and just say it. That you're
Because
gonna
the news story had broke by then, yeah. The
oh,
SG.
it had been long reported by that point. And so then Naboyu was like, wow, like, okay, like you left me no choice essentially.
Yeah, and yeah, I thought that was a pretty nasty blackmail, but it
Oh, it was
was,
horrible blackmail.
but it speaks to so how I viewed it was that like because you don't know this character's backstory, but I mean there are people who are just mean and they'll do the blackmail, but it crossed my mind that maybe the situation is so dire for both people that need
The money,
wages
yeah.
that they decide to, you know, like I think this whole movie what I liked about it is that you cross these gray area. For most people, this is like moral no-nos, right? You don't shoplift, you don't steal, you don't blackmail people with these kind of like dirty tricks if you don't know the whole circumstance, right? If you really were concerned about the girl, she would have called the police already, right?
Oh no, it was about her survival.
Exactly. So one of the things I liked about this movie is that it subtly, with like, you know, not telling you directly, it kind of puts you in the perspective of like these people are in really dire circumstances and they do whatever they can to get out of it, and they don't like even maybe when they were younger, more naive, they you know they flinch, but now it's like, nope, I need this job. Sorry, you're out. Like if you're okay with me blackmailing you, you have something better on me, then you know, okay, like it's your job. It was like would have been probably more fair would have been like a flip of the coin or who had more merit or something like that. But
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it ended up being like, you know, a blackmail situation. But I just wanted to highlight that to me when I was watching that scene, it just brought forth like, you know, I don't like what she did, but I also don't know her story, right? Because it's a movie, right?
Yeah, you have
But
no idea.
I wonder if she feels like she has to do this because she's so desperate. Because how I connected it was with how Shota shoplifts, right? He doesn't shoplift because he wants to take from people, right? But he's normalizing behavior because he's in a circumstance if he doesn't shoplift, he doesn't eat sometimes. So
Yeah, I agree.
so it's that those kind of connections is why I those are the high points I liked about this movie. Like I thought like these kind of connections were like, wow, this is it's not a complicated plot, but there's a lot of like you can watch something in the beginning and connect it to later, and you can also connect it to like obviously the world around you. So that's why I could see why this movie got a lot of praise with independent film festivals.
Sure.
Is there any particular scenes that stood out to you or connections that you liked a lot?
Trying to think off top. The one, I mean, obviously the ending was just so. What was interesting was essentially how sort of the end came about, which is that Shota ends up shoplifting, right? And he gets caught, which is sort of how it ends, and everything sort of falls apart at that point. And what was absolutely brutal to me was when essentially he's in the hospital, and then all of the family is just threatening to essentially leave, and they're going to leave without Shota. I was like, man, that's brutal, because at the end, it's just all about survival, and that was like the lowest of low, right? You're abandoning who's essentially a member of your family, of your forged family at that point. That was brutal. I also thought, man, the scene of like burying the dead grandmother below the house, I was like, oh, wow. Okay,
That was yeah, and I wanted to bring her up later, but you know, yeah, that was a brutal scene. Yeah.
that was brutal as well. And the other scene that was just very brutal is just when Yuri is adopted again, and her mother doesn't really want her there, but when her mother, like birth mother, asks her to come, and she's like, no, she's like, I don't want to come. She's like, I'll buy you something, because that's always how she enables Yuri. And she's like, nah. And at that point, you just see the complete disconnect of where she doesn't want anything to deal with her biological mother, and she's in a bad situation there.
Yeah.
It was really unfortunate.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, all the characters interacted, but you can clearly tell there's like groups, right? Like Osamu, like he ends up having intercourse with
with his wife.
Nobuyu. No, I don't think. Oh well.
They're married. The wife, yeah. For all intents and purposes, they're married.
I don't think it's officially said they're married. I could be wrong, but but yeah, what did you think of the grandmother character, the Hatsue? I thought her character was interesting too, because to give some backdrop, her character, like, it looks like she went through some of her own traumas, right? Her husband left her for another woman, had another family.
Yeah, which you find out later.
But the reason she has the pension, so for context, for context for the audience, yeah, everybody's doing the shoplifting or odd jobs, but it's still not enough, right?
They're also kind of using each other as well.
Yeah, it's still not enough, but like they do the pool of money, right? And it's still not enough, but it seems like how they've been able to make it is because, like, it's kind of like any household, right? Like you take all the incomes, right? And everybody has a percentage, and it goes into, like,
what is the pot.
What the pot is, right? And it seems like everybody else has like enough to help, or like scrap, like contribute, right? But let's say like the base, like, that 40, I'm just speculating, but that 40-50% that they need to just get started comes from the pension that she gets, because this is something that I think most, like, Westerners might not realize, is that
the wife of someone who has a pension in the societies, they still get some of it.
Yeah, and exactly. And the other point I want to bring up is that, like, divorce is still probably not. It's for the reasons.
Well, we don't know if they actually got divorced. Well, for one.
No, I don't think they did, for sure, because I think she gets the pension because legally, she even says it, right? Like,
no. She says that. She says she has a pension. She gives that reason, right? That we didn't divorce, that he died, and so you still get part of the pension. In reality, there is no pension.
You're thinking, you're talking about the money that she gets in cash.
That's implied that there is no pension.
That is imply that there is no pension.
It's implied that she basically just because essentially what she ends up doing is once in a month, it seems like, or once in a while, she will go to the children, the son's home of the woman that her husband left her for. And basically, they feel guilt-ridden and guilt-tripped, and that son does very well financially. And so they give that the grandmother a monthly allotment.
This is how I saw it. So I'll slightly disagree. I thought there was always a pension, but it still wasn't enough. And that extra money, she was keeping it stored. I mean, I'll have to do more reading.
I don't think so.
This, but I thought, like, she did have the. It just didn't, like, seem very. Maybe it was implied, but I didn't catch on to that there was no pension. I thought that at least she had, like, a bit of pension.
Okay, I mean, it can.
Because
that's not, I guess, the biggest thing. I mean, like, who cares? Regardless, the point was that part or all of that money was coming because she was being given money from this family, right?
Yeah,
that's actually the teenager. That's her parents.
Yeah, the only thing I will say, having like read more about Japanese society, is that divorce it still happens in Japan, but for like this specific reason, like if you were to leave, it's demonized everywhere, but if you were to like just have another family, in Japan it's all about saving face.
Yeah.
So I can 100% buy how, like, he did not, like, legally, separate, but like for all intents and purposes, he was like, I'm supporting my family.
With her.
I'm gonna raise the new kid, like the kid that she met, like, as my own son, and I'm gonna give him all the knowledge and money that I can. But, like, those, like, government things like pensions, yeah, she'll get whatever. And it looks like that pension was not even, like, crazy. It's not like she was, like, living luxuriously with that pension. So,
well, it's not the full. Once the husband dies, it's not the full. Even here, they have things like that where if one of your spouses dies and they have a pension, you only get like a third or half of it.
Yeah, I think that's my grandmother is the same situation. Yeah.
Especially the military does that a lot.
So yeah, so to your point, I think that extra money, it comes up later, right? That shows up that she had the extra money, which hurts her. Again, it was a weird relationship because it's a reveal that like what's her name? Aki, that because she refers to Hatsu as her grandmother, but that might be because of like you said, a little subtlety with because legally maybe she is,
Mm-hmm.
but bloodline no, right? Like
Yeah.
she is the granddaughter of her husband who had another another
Mm-hmm.
woman. I thought that dynamic was interesting, right? It's again, I think it was what I like about this movie is that like I always like movies that like if you know something about like the culture or like some background, like you can imply and infer things.
Mm-hmm.
Versus like if you're like really raw, fresh, like you probably need to like rewatch or do some extra reading because right, she's living with Hatsue, but like it's pretty much implied. To your point, use the word implied that her parents, uh, they knew that she was living there, and they were really giving the money to have her like hush hush. Like we know that she's not really in Australia studying. She's
Yeah.
working at a. I was gonna say that opens up our whole discussion about Aki. Her
Her
profession.
character is interesting.
Yeah, her profession is basically working as a.
What do
I
you
guess
call it?
I guess in our culture we would say like a sex worker, a stripper, but in Japan it's a bit
It's
different.
even more different.
It's in
And it's
Japan it's
something that we don't
different.
really have here.
Not yet, at least. But it's
Yeah.
in Japan, it's a bit different. It's that gray area between both worlds. I forgot. There's an actual Japanese term, but I forgot what it's
It's
called.
almost like here's the best way to put it. It's like an in-person cam girl,
Yeah, it's.
right? It's like a live cam girl is
I
how I
think
would
I
put
think
it.
the best way to give it to I think that's a good analogy. I think the best way to give it to the audience is like think of like paid companionship. So like how some people hire escorts just to hang out with them
For the
or
GFE.
yeah for the gram or
Yeah,
whatever.
for
It's just,
appearances.
it's similar concept, but except obviously like he's not strolling outside with her, but like he's going somewhere to. Okay, there is some sexual, themes like she is like showing her underwear and stuff, but and there is a separate room for more like an in-depth hugging session, but it's
Yeah,
not
for
like
I would say like intimacy.
yeah
Yeah.
for intimacy, but it's not
Um,
like he's going to the hotel and like getting hookers in and out.
what I will say was interesting. I don't know how prominent it is now. I did read that some cities in the U.S. From as late as like 8 years ago, they were actually having certain businesses that were like professionally where you can go to be professionally cuddled, which like blew my mind. But there was a lot of regulation within these businesses as well, because a lot of cities thought that they could be a front for prostitution.
Yeah, and this happens to a lot of like girls who work in like this world of OnlyFans or I guess even like
Yeah, but that's all. I guess that's why I was trying to make the distinction. That's all virtual. This was interesting because it's like an in-person show. Like you have a booth and you're just watching this girl in person from behind a like a plastic shield, essentially.
yeah. Sorry, what I was gonna connect was like so she has a client that's
Mm-hmm.
basically a fan, like, and I was gonna relate to like how some people now, like in the age of COVID, have these followings now on OnlyFans, and they have these loyal, let's say, 5 dudes that throw the money, and she's not mean, right? So she has some sympathy for this person, but this person looks like he's also like pretty traumatized himself.
Yeah, he's
I forgot
emotionally damaged for sure.
I forgot his name, but like that whole hugging cuddling session was pretty intense.
That was rough.
That was
It was
intense as a
interesting.
scene because it looks like he was like cutting himself, right? I think right. He had
It was
damage on his
implied
hand.
he was. There was some self damage that was going on.
Emotional damage, yeah,
Emotional,
uh,
yeah, with physical. Yeah.
repercussions. So, so in general, when we're first introduced to Aki's profession, it did. I mean, I had known about that world, but like to see it in a movie, I thought that was also pretty unique.
Hmm.
The whole like like I said, through the window and stuff like that, and then how they have to communicate through like the sheet of paper, right? They write letters and stuff.
Yeah. It was
Um,
just interesting because there's a lot of things that are, I guess, more or yeah. There's a lot of things in like industries that are commonplace in Japan that are not quite as commonplace here. Like we don't have that equivalent that I'm aware of anyway here in the U.S.
Yeah, what's interesting is like, we've done a lot of movies based off economic desperation, and one thing I found very, I mean, I guess we all knew this deep down, but it's interesting to see it in movies, like with Daniel Blake or Burning, is that in the background for a woman, the one thing that, especially if they're better looking, the one thing they can use to, make money or use as an asset, right? Because in the end, when you're poor, you have to use what you have, right? Your skills, your body, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame to say, but like for a lot of women, if they have the opportunity, like one of the easiest things to make money is to use their
Use
sexual appeal,
yourself.
use your sexual appeal, right? And we've seen many movies now, and I got one other one coming up that you'll see the same thing where, it's that like they prefer not to, right? But in the end, when they're forced to, they know that that's the way to go because men will pay, and we see this now with COVID, right? With the blowing up of private Snapchat and OnlyFans, that men will pay money, and that's enough to maybe scrap that meal or get that extra, like, just that money they need to cover the rent or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
I think I like that as an aspect of this movie too, because I like seeing that connection, throughout. Not that it should happen, but it's reality for many
So the
people.
other thing that I will point out about this movie that I liked, especially knowing I don't know a lot about Japanese culture, but now I know a bit, is that it was very interesting seeing this movie because it was very well meant to, show the inner struggles of essentially the working poor in Japan. But it was also, it elicited a lot of emotional, like visceral reactions and responses from the audience. At least that's what it was trying to do. That's very interesting because Japanese society just in general is sort of cold and you're not really supposed to show emotion based on what I've heard. So it was interesting seeing them, I guess, trying to move past sort of cultural norms there within this film because it was a very emotional movie.
Oh yeah, it was.
Because yeah, I mean, sorry, this is just going off a tangent, but it was actually not that long ago I was listening to a podcast that we both listened to from comedian Andrew Schultz. He was actually talking about, I think he went sometime in the past, not too distant past, pre-COVID to Japan, and sort of his takeaway, and I'd love to visit Japan at some point, was that it was the most commercialized place that he's ever been, meaning that anything you could ever imagine that you need is just available. It's like capitalized on commercially. So he said that he was at his bar with, I guess, his now fiance, but they were they were at a bar, I guess, like cuddling, and they kissed, and bartender freaked out and said, no, you can't do that. What are you doing? It freaked him out. And he's like, they have specific bars where you can go to be, a little more intimate with like your significant other, or like if you need, like even what I told you the other day or like a while back that I watched, which was that they have the boyfriend experience, which is you can hire somebody to come and comfort you as you cry because you're not sort of meant to show emotion, even as a woman, really, in Japan. And so it's a very like emotionally like repressed society, but because of that, everything is so like commercialized that you can just go pay for whatever you need there. And we're a very commercialized society. We're just not to that extent, I would say.
Yeah, that's a good point about the emotion or the politeness. This is something I do know is that if you're sick, you know how like normally like people are sick on the bus. Okay, with COVID, it's supposed to change. And it's
Yeah,
supposed to be
but say let's go with pre-COVID norms.
Yeah, like this is why I think this is one of the reasons why maybe countries like Japan have done better with the COVID response than we have, is because I think I've shared this before, where if you're like you have a runny nose, you're supposed to like not sneeze on trains and buses. Like it's impolite to do that to anybody around you. So you either have to cover your mouth 100%, or you have to keep. And also, even the sound of sneezing, if it disturbs somebody else, is deemed impolite. So people just like I've read like Reddit posts where people say like you hear like 3 people just like sucking up their boogers like every like 2 seconds because they know that they sneeze, it's deemed as very impolite and rude. It's a different kind of mindset, like you're saying, like
100%.
Like here, like if people want to sneeze, they're just gonna like. I think most people do try to do the suck it up, but at one point you're like it's too much and you just do it. But apparently, like they really like you'll never hear so much like freak in the winters. You'll never hear so much sniffling like in your life. The sucking up of boogers. So. And this is also why that stereotype happens of like when perverts like grope women, especially when it's rush hour. A woman, if she screams help or says get off, is deemed like impolite to her neighbors because like maybe they don't care,
Right.
So it's like it's a bit of a stereotype, but there is enough documentation that it does happen because you're not supposed to disturb people around you. That's why they're like in many like in their like temples and stuff. It's very quiet, right? Because you're not supposed to disturb others. I mean that part I do like. I don't like to be disturbed myself, so I would love my neighbors to be less noisy. Respect the neighbors. But in general, it is a different mentality, different society. I think from Schultz's perspective, yeah, it's like totally just be Willington, but it's because some people might be disturbed by seeing a kiss from a couple, but because they don't want to see
No,
that.
yeah, no PDA essentially is what he was saying.
Yeah,
And if you do, like, there's specific places where you can display PDA. We don't necessarily have those. I mean, we do, but it's not, I guess, that overt. Like, we don't have specific like unwritten codes like that in most. Like, there's certain, obviously you wouldn't show PDA at church or like certain areas, but it's not that widespread where it's like unwritten, like, no, you can't do that anywhere except for these very few established places. Like,
yeah, I know that
give your significant other a kiss.
when I started watching anime, one thing that threw me off is that like when couples want to like hook up, right? They don't actually do it at like their parents' home, which just makes sense. But obviously in American culture, if you have no money, you do that, right? Or even like some hotels, but they go to these concepts of love hotels. I don't think we have motels, we have hotels. We don't have the concept of love hotels, right? So like a specific type of hotel that's designed for intimacy.
I would say motels are the closest thing we have to that. That's
The
not
closest
so.
thing, but it's not like a whole industry, right? The branding. If you go to one of these, the branding.
No, they
is
just
like,
say it. So it's basically accepted as such.
yeah, and to your point, it's so commercialized, right? It's like the
Very much.
branding of the hotel. Even when you go inside, it's like, what kind of bed do you want? Do you want like, flowers in there? What kind of do you want a TV? And like, it's like
Interesting.
very like it's like a la carte, like like what kind of experience you want. So to Schultz's point, yeah, it is
customizable.
commercial. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was his main point. Was that he's like, yeah, it was interesting because everything, like anything you want, is just like you could find it and you could pay for whatever, any sort of convenience. So which was like, huh? I was like, yeah, we're very, and you just reflect on that with like America. It's like we're very commercialized here, but we're not to that point. I think because we're not that. I would say emotionally or sexually repressed as a society.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's what they were, especially with. Sorry, we're getting off tangent, but with
Hockey.
well, yeah, with Aki's character, like that's why you like it's pretty accepted and common for them to have that sort of, in-person call girl experience.
Yeah. So going back to the film, one scene that I found to be probably
I'm sorry, not call girl, cam girl. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, to be my favorite scene probably is when the Boyu, she is talking to the police, and they're talking about like did you they're talking about Yuri, right? They're talking about did you want it, like you're trying to pretend to be mother, and then she has that great line about motherhood isn't just because you gave birth, and it's also like the role and how you treat the child.
It's the emotional connection.
I thought that scene, that line was very powerful. I thought it said a lot about I said a lot about like maybe not just Japan, but I think every society, how they view the family unit. Sorry there, and how just because you are blood related doesn't not always mean that you are a better brother, father, son. And I thought that was a really strong scene, one of my favorites in the movie. I don't know if you got the same takeaway, but curious to get your thoughts on Yuri's relationship
I mean,
with Nobuyo and stuff.
It's 100% true. Just because you're someone birthy doesn't necessarily mean they're going to live up to all those expectations or all the needs that you as a child need from your parents, right? There's plenty of parents out there that, this is a personal thing, I guess it's, some people may take it as controversial, but they shouldn't be parents in my view, because they just can't offer necessarily that emotional support that is needed as a parent, or they just don't know how to be a good parent. I mean, you can see that clearly with cartoon that you recently introduced me to, BoJack Horseman. It's a very brutal relationship with his parents, and that really has scarred him for life in the show.
Oh yeah, That's a great show. That's a great show. Everybody who watch that show.
A little plug, but yeah, his mom and dad really screwed him up quite a bit.
Because they were screwed up. It talks about, anyway, it's a bit about
Yes.
cycles too. But going back to the film, so there's like two relationships that are like probably the centerpieces of this film, right? It's hers with Yuri, and it's Shota's with
Osamu.
Yeah, and I thought their dynamic is probably one of the central pieces of this story, right? Because he tries to get him to call him father, and Shota's reluctant most of the movie until the end. And I just found their dynamic interesting because even though he was not the perfect person, he was, I guess, trying to raise this kid, in his own way.
Yeah, he was trying to. Where you saw where he failed is when you see what Shota's views are on education at the beginning, where it's like, wow, okay, you're like, I can see you're trying to be good, but you're really screwing this kid up in a big way by not telling him not to go to school.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's, and I go back to that again. I love how this movie you can connect beginning to end. So like when the police are questioning about this kid isn't going to school, what are you doing? You're just teaching them like these skills that are not they're deviant and
telling them to be street smart is what he's trying to teach them.
But he has that line that I'm repeating again that he says that I'm just teaching what I taught, and you wonder if he was taught the same thing.
What I was taught, yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think it goes back to cycles where you're trapped because unless you are lucky enough to have, I think most families can speak to this, right? Like you have some generation in your family that they just broke out of the norm. They did something that was not their own parents' way.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that.
And
but then they start these own negative cycles as well. Some people.
Well, I think it's because no matter even if you break up, let's say economically, it might take more generations to break the emotional, psychological stuff because
it's more emotional.
Because I think what happens is you carry always something, right? Like it doesn't just disappear just because maybe you got out of poverty or something. You have some, you have your own like anxieties and you pass that on yourself because that's how.
Or need that wasn't fulfilled.
Yeah, that exactly. It's very complicated. I'm just really simplifying it here, but I think like Shota's learning. I think the story's untold. We don't get what's after, but you see that like I go back to my earlier point again that like if he had stayed in this random family unit, he would have probably ended up very similar to Osamu.
Yeah,
and I think again I guess we both like films that don't just tell us this. So I like how like just through storytelling, you get that impression that like this is a bad situation, this ending. For some characters, it's going to be really bad, like for Yuri. But you wonder for Shota if it's a chance to a different life.
Yeah, I mean, I like this film because it doesn't. I mean, you see, and you have to pick out like what it's trying to tell you, right? Whereas, what was another movie? Oh, like, did you ever see Joker, the new one that came out last
year? Yeah, I did see the Joker. Yeah.
What I didn't like, and I think a lot of people sort of felt this way, is they sort of tell you basically what they've been like verbally, what they've been showing you the whole movie, and it's almost like, oh, you think your audience is too dumb to necessarily be able to pick that up.
Yeah, it breaks that rule that I like. It's the show don't tell. Don't use like you can if you're using like dialogue to drive a story, makes sense, right? Like social network.
It was kind of like they used dialogue.
This was I know what you're talking about. This was exposition to explain stuff that
you need to know. I was just like, what was the end of that movie? They're all like, yeah, the Joker's like, this is what happens when you treat the mentally ill in your society so bad, they'll tend to snap like this. It's like, wow, yeah, I could obviously pick that up throughout the film. That was the point of what you were showing me for the last hour and a half. And then I was like, you feel kind of insulted as like an audience viewer. It's like, what, you didn't think I was capable of picking that up? Whereas with this kind of movie, they didn't do that. They didn't treat you as dumb, right? It was for you to sort of pick out.
Yeah, and I think we both tend to prefer films that it's like show don't tell. I think that like you can have a movie centered on a lot of talking, but I think the good ones are that use the dialogue to drive storyline. So I think of Social Network, right? Like that movie is just a lot of like in a room talking, different scenes, but they're all like they're talking. There's no like big road trip, big explosions. But that's a good movie in the sense that it's driven through dialogue, but it doesn't like over explain like you said, have like long expositions of like, for you to understand this next scene, I'm gonna this character is gonna say all these things so that you can have a reference, right?
Yeah.
I
This is
still
what
think,
this is how this is what happens like at the like low levels of society. People are just making all these moves to survive. But yeah, I can pick that out. Like if they explained it like that, I would not like this movie at all.
yeah, what I like is like the films that it's driven through the story, the messages, and
Yeah.
like how this film more than like usually what we usually review, like I'm able to connect certain scenes and they connect later, and it's like that's actually probably the sign of a great film.
Sure.
And yeah, I think the only other scene I'm trying to think of one that I really like to discuss is like so again, this is how it connects. This again, credit to the film how it just connects through. So you know how Shota gets reprimanded one time by a store owner not to steal candy,
Oh yeah. Yeah. You said
and he
don't like teach her those habits or something.
don't teach her those habits. It's wrong, right? Like, and he still gives him something, right? Like take this, you know. But
Or don't make her do it. Yeah, I was
yeah,
like, huh. It was an interesting
and
scene.
and later this connects because I see that he has this doubt when Yuri's starting to normalize his behavior too. Like she's trying to help
Yeah,
herself.
it kind of like kind of
Clicked in his brain, yeah. It
Yeah.
clicked in his brain, like, oh wait, this is maybe wrong. I shouldn't have a 4-year-old, or I don't know what her age is, but very young, right? Basically like 4 or 5 years.
Should I be teaching her these habits? I think
Yeah.
was what he was
Um,
kind of like thinking of.
and because he has his rash decision making, he ends up getting caught running and breaking his leg and leading to that sequence you described where it all falls apart and the family tries
But
to.
later on, it's kind of revealed. Even Shota admits he's like, I was trying to get caught, and so that was a very interesting sort of line too in the film.
Yeah, I think,
Maybe he was just tired of his lifestyle. I don't know.
or he might have just felt guilty because I think also what
Could have
impacted him was that remember that they go back to that store and it closed out of business.
been.
And he's been shoplifting there, and I think it happens when you get older, right? You
Oh
become more,
right, yeah, that store did close. That
yeah,
really affected him because now it was
yeah.
that
So
shoplifting.
again,
And
I can. So what's interesting is that I had an. We'll get to scores later, but I had an initial score for this film, and I'm probably going to bump it up a little bit actually because I see when I was rethinking about this film, or not rethinking, like reviewing it myself in my mind, I see that like how people might have liked this film. I preferred Burning, and I still do, but I could see how people would have liked this film more than Burning because this one is like a little bit easier to just see the
it's
thread.
digestible.
Yeah, it's easier to see the threads, and it's still really great, right? It's like still
Yeah.
telling a very important story, and if you're able to connect like 3 scenes that lead to him messing up like I said, wanting to get caught, because I think he starts piecing together that this shoplifting, I'm doing it to survive, but like we're all losing in the end. The only people who really win are the people who are really above us in society,
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about that when we get to platform, but
oh yes, so we will be
yeah.
visiting that a lot next week.
And so, and I guess I guess it'll be a good compare and contrast because I think this film focused on like the human story at that level.
This was
Well,
there was no allegory in this story, but the movie we'll be reviewing next week is a complete allegory on social class.
yeah, exactly. And I think there's always a preference point of like, do you prefer that or you prefer like the humans, like the grittiness of that day to
It
day?
depends, or maybe you can appreciate both.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what we score the other one, but so I will say that like this film I thought like so like that the store closing, that dialogue of the don't teach the young, you're supposedly your sister, quote unquote, steal. I think it all like ravels in that moment, triggers him, and then he jumps, breaks his leg, and it leads to him getting caught and getting into the system. Because I think he starts. My whole point is that I think as any of us gets older, right, we start becoming more aware.
Yeah.
The naivete of just following your parents' instructions or the adults, like the teacher's instructions. You start realizing that they're not always correct.
And you're more aware of your actions.
And I think Shota starts realizing that, this isn't always right. Like I need to survive, but this isn't how to live. Like this is pretty brutal. Like I'm basically one accident away from being like dead, like I'm gonna starve in a corner somewhere. Even when remember when Osamu gets like that injury, right? It affects how he's able to work and get money, right? He has to rely on the other unit because he hurt his foot, on a construction job or something. And so I think
and they gave him no workers comp too. That was messed up.
Yeah, no workers, but that speaks a lot to our modern gig economy of the 0-day contract. Zero. I think it's
You're
called
just a
zero
contractor, dude. That's all
contract
you
or
are.
something like that. Yeah. So
You get no
yeah,
bennies, no rights as a contractor.
to give we'll see what by the time this episode uploads, but to give some context, I will be taking a break from more class oriented films because these are my favorite, but I'm gonna take a break for a bit. But there's some films that I have lined up where they talk about like contract work, and I'm definitely gonna have us discuss it because it's more brutal films for my partner here. But yeah, um,
Speaking as
the
someone who has been a contractor before, just not quite to that level of blue collar. Yeah, I have some opinions on that.
So, but yeah, it's going to be more in the blue collar angle, but it's a tough world. I think I'm happy that filmmakers are exploring this because I think they're not. I don't think enough people realize that when they're using the gig economy for anything, like these people really are just the only thing the only thing they can possibly benefit is the actual direct money because there is no real health care, there's really no compensation. They bend the rules legally so they don't have to. They're even like less. They're basically cheap labor,
Mhm.
and for these Uber and DoorDash drivers, there really isn't a like they think they're getting off because they're their own boss. Like I love how they also label like, oh, you're your own boss, you're your own company, but it's a lie, and it's
Of course, it's a lie.
it's just brutal because they're being used like basically borderline
You're your own company. It's like, no, you're not.
indentured servitude. So, but no, well, that will be a topic for another time. But yeah, I think in general for this film, we've discussed everything I kind of wanted to talk about. I don't know if there's anything you
Oh,
want to
I
talk
will
about.
say there's one other scene that sort of got me. It's like, oh, it was kind of like a gut punch. And it's really when Shota and Osamu are, it's at the end of the film once Osamu is like out and he has his own little place, right? And they're spending time together, right? And at some point, Shota gets kind of quiet and Osamu's like, is everything right? And basically he said, the police said you were all gonna leave me. Is that true? And you could just see in Osamu, he's like that sort of shame came over him at that point because that is like messed up and like he knows that all of his actions are just meant for pure survival, but he does feel remorse at that point. You can just tell
Yeah.
because he really does care about Shota. I mean, it's like you know that. I mean, any human sort of felt that emotion when you're acting in one way sort of selfishly and you know you shouldn't have done that. It's that remorse that comes over. I thought that was a very good scene in the movie too.
And going back to my theme of like the strength of this film is how it ties scenes together.
Yeah, that was
There's
one.
another, yeah, there was another scene that ties to why he blew up the shop. Like he wanted to get caught. Remember when they're in the parking lot and
Oh yeah,
Osamu is
stealing the car.
stealing the car and shut the ass like, wait, but this is like he says this is different. Like this car is locked and you're actually destroying property to get this thing. It's not like we're just
And
taking.
Osamu's past the point of feeling remorse
Yeah,
for like acting.
yeah. For like rich people or people have more than him, it's just like no, we're getting this stuff inside this car. It's gonna be, we're gonna get more money in our pocket. And again, I think that's another scene that again, it's a build. Good films do that, right? It's a build up to that scene in the grocery store with
Yeah,
Yuri. Like
that's when you see Shota start to develop his morality. And what's interesting is that Shota, once he is removed from that environment and goes to school, he's actually a very good student.
yeah, he is. Yeah, they do make that comment that like
Mm-hmm.
he is doing well and like they'll be mad at him that he's hanging out with Osamu, but overall the family and the I don't know what other systems they have there.
Oh, so that was the other scene. Like there were a couple good scenes because there's a lot that happened at the very end. The
Yeah,
other scene is when Osamu takes Shota to visit Nobuyo in the prison, and at that moment, there was a moment of realization of what was the right thing to do from Nobuyo because she was acting selfishly, and this is the difference I think between Nobuyo and Osamu at this point is Nobuyo ends up telling him like, look, if you want to see your parents, this is where you find them. It was just sort of like this realization that this is the right thing to do. And as much as Osamu cares about Shota, he's very selfish in terms of what he wants and what he does. So he never sort of gives that selfless part to Shota. Whereas
yeah.
Nobuyo did in that scene.
Also, the one of the big also differences is that she ate all the charges, right? And
She ate all of them.
in theory, it should have been Osamu because he's the one who actually first found Yuri and brought him back. So he's actually the one
Well,
technically
it was for
speaking.
for her husband, for Yuri, for even like everything, and that's why you're like, dang. I was like, no, that's someone who like you just have to respect for really taking one for the team.
Yeah,
Whereas
and
Osamu, you don't really respect as much because it's like, wow, you let her eat everything, man.
and I'm somebody who believes that endings to films are kind of important.
Yeah.
I will say that this ending was bittersweet because you see that Shota is going to probably, over the course of his life, going to probably improve, but you see that Yuri's back where she started, and that was
That was the point. It's like it's two different outcomes, right? But it's brutal because, man, it's they give you sort of the bitter truth on bureaucracy. It's just cold, right? There's no emotion there, and there's not necessarily the state doesn't necessarily care about the outcome. Is like one of the big points of it, and that was a big point in like a show that we both like, The Wire, where you sort of show the breakdowns of the bureaucracy and where it lacks the humanity. And I think they did a good job in showing that in this film too.
I agree. Yeah, I have nothing else. So whenever you want to get into ratings,
I'm good with that. I mean, those were like a couple of the two scenes that popped up. I'm like, man, we got to touch upon that because they were very important scenes in the film.
Yeah, so I can go first on this one since I picked it.
Sure.
I will. So when I first watched this film, I had it at 8 out of 10, but I'm going with 8.5 because when I went through it again, it got the extra point because I started seeing why this movie probably won the award. I think it was at Cannes or I forgot what festival. It's a film that's really, the crafting is really well. Like it's very good. Like I was able to piece together the story by seeing how scenes connected, and like many movies do that, but this movie I was like, wow, this is like really good for all the character arcs, from Aki's to Shota's to Hatsue's, and I was like, that doesn't when it clicks in my brain like that is unique in a sense, and so I have to give it a little bit extra props. I thought the gritty realism was great in this film. It's not often we see, especially with a foreign film, like that grittiness of like how those at the bottom or closer to the bottom live. It's not something that I think societies are proud to explore because it's tough sometimes to watch that this is like people that live in your society and they're basically living hand to mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the acting was really good in this film. I thought the children were pretty good. I always give props to children because they usually don't have the same amount of experience as adults. I thought that was a strong point. The script was good. It's hard for me to fault many things in this film. The only thing I could think of is like, maybe the beginning's a bit slow, but I think that's just part of the setup. So I don't really even hold it against that. But for me, my take, like to get into that 9 range, it's kind of like it has to be a movie that I feel is super, super generational. I think this movie is really good, but I don't know if it's generational. I don't know if it's something that really cracks like that cinema tier. It's such a high level that I feel like this movie is closer to a masterpiece. 8.5 to me is like very, very good. So it's probably like right before that gate of like, oh, the golden the golden jacket gate.
Yeah.
Like they say with sports, right? The hall of very, very good, not the greatest. So, but that's where I'm going with my rating. And I really, it's funny when I watched it the first time I liked it, but when I thought about it more, it's rare for me to like a movie more. I usually do the opposite. I usually go, oh, I give it a score, then I think about it more, and I think about it more, and I nitpick more, and I go, oh, it's a point lower or half a point.
It's like
lower.
what you did with Coherence too.
Yeah,
where you wanted to give it a 9, and then you're like, there's nothing I can really say negatively about that movie.
Yeah, it's so. And this is one of the other rare times that I decided to increase my initial take.
Yeah, I was kind of the same way. I was actually planning on giving this an 8.5, but the more and more we thought about, like I thought about it, and the more we discussed, there's not a lot that I could really pick apart. It's more the pacing at times seemed sort of slower in a lull, but everything built upon itself and all of the arcs tied together very well in this, where it explained pretty much everything. Yeah, my score for this film is a 9. I thought they did a great job in terms of the pace. This film was very much so like really reminded me of like a modern day Oliver Twist, right? Exploring that sort of level of society and, pickpocketing. They're not pickpocketing in this movie, they're shoplifting, whereas in Oliver Twist, they were big into pickpocketing other people. But yeah, just there's not much that I could say that really I didn't really enjoy about this film, other than I think what people might not like, especially in today's society where you like a lot of people like films to be more upbeat and fast paced. This was not that. It's more realistic.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a film that I expect to beat box office numbers,
No,
but I can see why it did well on the indie scene.
it's very socially conscious type of film.
Yeah. But for an indie film, I think this was an indie film. This was it was well done.
Yeah, well, I mean, it won the Palme d'Oro, so
So that's the
that's the controversy.
yeah, but that's the award I was thinking of. I know it won something. It's like Cannes, right? Yeah. So in that sense, like I agree. Like this movie was I guess we both upped our scores a little bit. You know, it's well crafted, it's well directed, it's well written. Like there's not much to falter with. And I see why it got love in the indie scene, but I did notice that like unlike the buzz around Parasite,
well, this was the year before.
Yeah, and I think also though, like you said, like to your point, Parasite had many overlapping things, but stylistically, you hit a nail on the head. It had a pace where it was slow.
It was faster though, but it was more dynamic than this film.
Yeah, exactly. And I see how like I'm starting to maybe because we're watching so many movies now, I'm starting to see why certain films they reach the Academy Awards and they have all the buzz versus like maybe this film, maybe the quality is just like it's not that far off, but it didn't generate at all. Like I had to find this kind of like digging a little bit. It wasn't like Parasite now where like
Burning was the same way where you had to dig.
Yeah, so it's like you said. I'm starting to see that there's a pattern between certain films' style, like you said, are still good. I still appreciate them, but they're not gonna get the love from like that Hollywood. I'm gonna call it the Hollywood media bias, because it is their bias, right? Why they promote certain films on the circuit and they hand out the Oscars, for. And I think I think as we keep doing movies, we're gonna keep seeing like this bias often.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I mean,
So,
there's just I mean, it's a certain club and a clique that they have there in Hollywood. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah, I think that's it for this week's episode. Do you have anything else that you wanna say about this?
No, I will say that if you're interested in real critique of Hollywood culture, watch BoJack Horseman.
Okay, it's quite a plug. It's actually a pretty good show, but man, if you don't like dark comedies that are really self-critical, I would not recommend watching it. But anyway,
but it's still the only show I will say that I've seen take the real digs of that Hollywood culture that I don't think is often done.
It takes digs at everybody. It's not just.
But I specifically like the Hollywood culture.
Right, even took digs at LAPD, which was great too. But anyway, that's it for this week's episode of the Critical Fools podcast. If you liked our commentary on the film and just, I guess, commentary overall, please like and subscribe to our channel so you'll be able to receive updates on our upcoming reviews as they drop. And yeah, stay tuned until next week. That's it for this week. Bye.